Well, first of all, I want to welcome you all again to the City of the Angels. If you didn't get to hear me yesterday, like all of you, I love my city, you love yours, and I like to call LA the city of America's hope and promise. It's the city where the world comes together. I always, when I talk about LA, I say it's a city where we come from 140 countries. We speak 200 languages. We have 37 nationalities that have the largest population here outside of their country of origin. 46% of the city is foreign born. About 70% of the city comes from the continents of Latin America, Asia, and Africa. And in many ways, it's a snapshot of where the country's going, what the country looks like. It has many, many challenges, but no challenge too great for a people who come here with their hopes and dreams, resilient in their ability to weather storms and the like. And so it's great to see you. And for those of you who didn't get a chance, last night was, I think, a great opportunity to see a program that we're very, very proud of, Summer Night Lights. You got to, those of you to go to a neighborhood that I grew up in, the East Side. It's the Ellis Island of Los Angeles, at least since the 30s, 40s, and 50s. It still is very much a community where immigrants come and kind of make their home. And for those of you who got an opportunity to see Summer Night Lights, I think we all walked away with just one of the best practices, I think, anywhere, in a program that shows that when you're investing in young people, when you're bringing families together in an area of high crime and historically high gang and gun violence, that you could transform a community. And as I shared with you, 57% drop in homicides around those parks, a 40% drop in violent crime, 700,000 visits last year at those 24 parks, and we've expanded it to 32. And so welcome this morning for those of you who weren't here yesterday. I don't have a long speech here because, in fact, what I want to do is get right into our agenda. For all of us, and we just had an opportunity, the leadership team, and this is a leadership team, Mayor Nutter, Mayor Smith, and I had an opportunity to speak to the Los Angeles Times editorial board earlier this morning. And our message was that as America's cities go, so go the nation. I shared with them the metro economies, their impact, 84% of the population, 90% of the GDP, 86% of the new jobs. The fact that mayors are focused on job creation, not just this debt limit and deficit talk, and the importance for us as we move ahead, for America's leaders, particularly those in the Beltway, to listen to cities, to hear us and our focus on jobs and job creation. And so in that vein, we have a number of people who we're going to be hearing from. We'll be hearing from John Podesta to my left, who will help us understand a little bit the details of this debt crisis, and Frank Luntz about how to articulate and argue for the Metro agenda. Mike Milken will be addressing the conference on innovation and what America needs to do to put people back to work and to focus on the new economy. Mickey Cantor will be speaking to us, leading a discussion on metropolitan exports and imports, and the focus in a world where China is rising, where the Asian economies are the fastest growing economies, the Latin American markets, the fastest growing markets, the need for us to be focused on all of that. I want to acknowledge, before we get started, some of the folks, the Business Council sponsors, J.P. Morgan Chase and Company, ABM Industries, Comcast, HDR, Interface Americas, Lineberger, Goggin, Blair and Sampson, Walmart and Starbucks. And also like to take the opportunity to acknowledge that Comcast is launching an expansive program to increase broadband access and close the digital divide for low-income families. And across the country, families and students on the National Free School Lunch Program in more than 4,000 districts. And I know that Comcast here today, and I want to acknowledge them. Now, just want to say before we get started that one of the things we were asked is, you know, what should the nation be doing right now? And the answer was they need to be focused on jobs and job creation, on making investments. We were asked, for instance, that in this time of cutting spending, you know, is all spending alike? And one of the things that all three of us, much as the rest of you have said in the past, you know, historically, when you make investments in transportation, in infrastructure, in R&D, in workforce development, these aren't partisan ideas. They've historically been bipartisan ideas, and they're not just spending. Not all spending is alike. These are investments that you need to make to get your economy moving again. And it's a message that we need to continue to make. And so I want to bring up now, if we could, and if I could give an opportunity to introduce John Podesta. Many of you know John from his days with the Clinton White House. I think he had 2 tours with the Clinton White House. He then began an organization, the Center for American Progress, which it has become a very, very important organization, a think tank for many mayors across the country, a smart, progressive voice at a time when we don't have enough smart, progressive voices. He then actually did the transition for President Obama and really helped to put that team together and the like. He's someone that I go to whenever I need someone a lot smarter than me for advice and for really where we need, what we need to be thinking about and what we need to be investing in. And then with us as well is Jim Newton. If you don't know Jim Newton, he's been part of the journalistic landscape of this town for a very, very long time. Was a reporter, an editorial writer, the chief of the editorial pages for the Los Angeles Times. He's written a couple of books, one on Earl Warren. I'm remembering this off the top of my head. Has been, you know, somebody that in the know in this town for a very, very long time. He'll be moderating. And Paul Maslin, who was here. Want to come up, Paul? Yeah. Thank you. And Paul Maslin, who I believe is one of the, and most of us acknowledge, one of the preeminent pollsters in the United States of America, and nobody knows California better than he does. We've worked indirectly together over the years, never had the fortune of working together. We'll also be speaking today. And I just want you all to know, I think you do know, there is press here, and so please be cognizant of that. Well, there's press here with Jim Newton, too. But unless you want to make some news. Jim, do you want to get started?
Thank you, Mayor.
I think you had
sorry. I thank you very much, Mayor. It's a pleasure to be here. On behalf of the LA Times, I want to welcome you all to LA. It's a pleasure to have all of you, and it's a treat to be introduced by the mayor. I think I can sort of get used to that. I'd also like to just add that it's a special pleasure to be here with John Podesta, who's already been introduced, obviously, and is well known to all of you. I would just add to what the mayor has already said, that John Podesta's writing and dedication to service are really a model, I think, of what so many people in this country are craving today. Really principled devotion to ideals without resort to the vitriol and name-calling that seems to have frozen up Washington so badly. That makes him especially welcome kickoff speaker today, and especially welcome here in LA. I really hope to just ask a few questions and really yield the balance of my time to all of you, who will have better questions for John than I will. But I thought I could just at least start things going. And just by asking you, John, sort of what is your sense of the state of play in Washington at the moment, particularly on the debt ceiling and the deficit negotiations, and sort of where do you see this ending up?
Thanks, Jim. I'm tempted to look at my BlackBerry to answer that question, to see if anything's happening. And with due respect to Mayor Gray, I come from the nation's capital, which has become the global capital of dysfunctionality. So I admire what all of you have done and have to do in order to make your city's work really get to the job of creating jobs in this long, stretched out effects of the Great Recession. And I particularly want to thank Mayor Villaraigosa for inviting me here today. The only thing I disagree with is what he said about me and him. I always come to him for great ideas. And if I could just at the front end say that I'm glad to see Mayor Brown, my former Clinton administration colleague, joined at the table. So it's good to be in a place where there are a bunch of sane people as opposed to what's happening in Washington. I think that right now there's no agreement. Speaker Boehner addressed his caucus. I'll get to what the options are sort of going forward. But there's no agreement. He continues to negotiate with President Obama. He gave a very gloomy report to his own caucus. At least that's the reports from his members coming out. There's still this attempt to try to get some grand bargain which would stabilize the debt and deal with the long-term debt problems of the country, but it hasn't come to fruition yet. I think that the consequences of failure are very well known to you. Jay Powell, who's a former Bush administration Treasury senior official, just did a report that really analyzed day by day what happens if we click past August 2nd and actually the United States for the first time ever actually goes into default. And it would mean that 40 to 45% of the bills that the government has to pay immediately cannot be paid. The rating agencies are going to downgrade the credit ratings. We're already on a watch list. There was a previous technical glitch in 1979 during the Carter administration where there was just a few days where bonds couldn't be paid, and that resulted in a 500 basis point rise in bonds. That ripples through the entire economy, and I think that's really for those folks who and I think there's probably plenty of people to blame for the condition we're in right now, but the people who think we can manage this, who think that the risk is overblown, who won't vote for a penny of revenue in a balanced plan, I think should listen to Ronald Reagan, who in 1983, when he was facing this situation, said the consequences of default are impossible to predict and awesome to contemplate. So if you think about that, 500 basis points, 50 basis points floating through the entire economy, what it's going to do to your bond ratings, what it's going to do to the states. Moody's has already put Virginia, Maryland, some other states on notice that their bond ratings can be downgraded because they're particularly subject to the loss of federal employment and to federal contracts. It just will ripple through not only finances at the federal level, at the state level, and at the municipal level, but it also will raise interest rates for everybody. It creates a risk premium that I think has some long-term implications for home mortgages, for credit cards, So it's really just, as I said, an awful thing to contemplate. It is also true that we need to grapple with the long-term debt. I think that's what the President and the Speaker and the others are trying to do. But I would go back to something the Mayor said, which is, as we do that and we create plans for what the federal balance sheet ought to look like, and I come from an administration, when I was the Chief of Staff, we had surpluses, not only balanced budgets, for the 3 years that I served as Chief of Staff. But we did that, but also we focused on investments in people, investments in technology, investments in the education system, investments in infrastructure, investments in the cities. And we're going to have to be able to reduce spending in the federal government. We're going to have to do it in a smart way and in a prioritized way, and doing things like I know that this group supports, like America's Fast Forward Initiative, and that increase in TIFIA to get more bang out of the dollars that we are spending. Because I think just a way of just kind of strangling the federal government will, again, create more job loss, a weaker economy, and a platform for failure going forward. With respect to what's actually happening, there's sort of 3 ideas on the table. One is so-called the Gang of Six, which is a bipartisan group. It's produced the only bipartisan plan so far, picks up on the Simpson-Bowles Commission. It's the 6 U.S. senators, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans. It's now become the Gang of 8. They've added 1 to each side. It seems to have fairly strong support in the Senate. It's a $4 trillion revenue reduction package over 10 years. It has higher revenues than the discussions that the Speaker and the President had. That is, it raises more money over 10 years than has been contemplated by the President and the Speaker, and it protects the most vulnerable in a way that's probably more strong than what's at least leaked out of the discussions that are going on between the White House and the Speaker. You know, from that perspective, although I don't like all the details in it, it's probably maybe the best of the ideas that are on the table right now with respect to trying to get the revenue that we need and protect the people who most need protection. It seems to me that it has very little chance of passing in the House. It has the cuts that it makes particularly into Social Security has very little support on the Democratic side, and the increased revenue has very little support on the Republican side. So while it's a bipartisan plan, a serious plan in the Senate, I don't see it passing in the House. The Obama-Boehner negotiations now are looking at $3 trillion. It seems more tilted towards getting House Republican votes. Again, we're sort of reading tea leaves and trying to talk to people who aren't saying much, but it combines $1.5 trillion of immediate spending cuts with $1.5 trillion of additional revenue and entitlement cuts that would be triggered in and linked together at some future point, probably over the course of the next year. And then the last, which is probably the most cynical, but maybe at this stage, given the fact that the sand's running through the hourglass, maybe the most likely, is the McConnell-Reed proposal, which also cuts probably $1 billion or $1 billion, as much as $1.5 billion out of mostly discretionary spending, some entitlement spending, but it kicks it past the election. It basically says, we can't resolve this, we're too far apart, we're going to leave it to the President to raise the debt limit. We can do what we can do, but this has to go back to the American people. They have to decide what level of taxation they're willing to permit and what kind of protection we're going to have for Social Security and Medicare. And I say it's cynical because it basically is a means of throwing the responsibility for raising the debt limit to the President. But in this circumstance, it may be the thing that needs to get done and that we ought to do in order to stop those catastrophic effects that I talked about. And so, you know, we're all, as I said, I'm sitting on my BlackBerry and talking to my staff back in Washington to see whether one of these, particularly one of the latter 2 alternatives, will materialize in times to start to stop that debt clock from passing midnight. February, we sit here on July 22nd. That was the day that was previously announced as the drop-dead date for an agreement to come together in order to implement a legislation that would raise the debt ceiling before August 2nd. So we're in real time now, and I think the bond rating agencies, people on Wall Street are watching to see what's going to happen really hour by hour as we sit here.
I wonder, why is it? I mean, if you just back up a little bit and just sort of address the question of why this really ministerial act that Republicans have voted for under Democratic presidents, Democrats have voted for under Republican presidents, why this has become such a flashpoint for all this division?
Well, I think that just to throw out some statistics, I think since 1964, the debt limit's been raised 72 times. During the Bush administration, it was raised 10 times. We added $6 trillion worth of debt over that period of time without a lot of falderall. It was a ministerial act. I think that early in the year, particularly pressed by the Tea Party members in the House, I think that the House leadership decided that this was going to be the vehicle for trying to extract large spending cuts. I think the president in February and March decided that it could be the vehicle for trying to put together a large package of deficit and debt reduction that would be more balanced, and that would include some additional revenue. The clock ticked, nothing happened. There were some negotiations with the Speaker that his caucus rejected several weeks ago. And so we find ourselves in a very difficult circumstance where you have to find a sweet spot where the president can sign a bill, 60 senators can vote for a bill that implicates a bipartisan majority and tough to get. The House, which is in a very different place politically, can find a majority, and a majority of Republicans in the House will vote for it, or else Speaker Boehner won't bring it forward. So the trying to kind of thread that needle to find 135 or 40 Republicans who will vote for a bill, another 100 Democrats in the House who vote for a bill, that does a lot of tough stuff. You're used to it. Everybody sitting around the table is used to it. But the buck stops with you, and it very rarely, I'll get in trouble with my congressional colleagues, it very rarely stops with them. They can say they won't vote for any revenue, or they won't vote for the debt limit, or they won't vote for any cuts in entitlements, or they won't vote for this, won't vote for that, and it never really rolls down in their lap.
And one common theme of all these plans appears to be some significant deficit reduction. What is that, assuming that whatever bill, if one emerges from all of this, I'm sorry, I'm not tying into it, if deficit reduction is a major component of this package, whatever emerges, what does that mean for the people at this table who really are likely to see cuts in federal support for the kinds of things that they run?
Well, I think that, cutting discretionary spending at the level that's being discussed, $1.2 trillion, is extraordinary, really. And I think that it's going to hit in certain places, I think, harder than others. Federal support for housing in particular, at a time when we're still in the trough of the housing crisis that was the result of the recession, will take some very hard hits. In the discussion over the fiscal 11 budget, I think that there were about 10% cuts over what the previous fiscal year into the fiscal year we're currently in, and more looking forward I think that on the tax side, you're looking for extraction of federal support for housing in general as well. I think, people will try to protect certain accounts. My guess is the president will do his damnedest to protect his investments in education. But at that level, everything is under the gun. And I think, whether that's, again, I come back to transportation. There was bipartisan support for the America Fast Forward initiative to take TIFIA up to $1 billion. But in the context in the House of a 30% cut in transit, a 25% cut in highway funding in the highway bill that Chairman Micah just produced, that would result in most analysis in the loss of another 500,000 jobs next year if we take funding levels down that low. So I think there's pressure across everything that you're looking at, including including the really core basic supports for the working poor and poor people in the country. The House Agriculture Committee just took $1 billion out of WIC and food assistance. I mean, so you're talking very deep, I think, very deep cuts. And so it really, I think, calls upon two things. One is for this group, I think, to make the argument about the necessary investments to protect at least those things that are going to produce economic growth, job creation, and innovation, education, those things going forward. Because much of this is kind of, I think, baked in now that things are going down. So at least try to protect what's most important, and then try to find innovative ways to leverage the private sector. I think that's another thing that your voices would be very important to be heard on. Talked about transportation. I think the same thing is true with respect to the president's push an infrastructure bank. We at the center of push for a green bank to do energy transformation, try to get new technology into the system. But I think anything where $1 of federal money can be used to leverage more private sector investment is going to be necessary, as opposed to sort of putting the whole load, I think, on the federal government.
Mayors, I know that a few of you are going to have some questions, and the first one will be Michael, but let me have Jim ask a few questions, and then you all get ready to write down your questions, and we'll go to you. But Jim?
Let me just ask maybe one more or two. Just to the atmospherics of all of this, do you have a sense that the elected representatives in Washington are conscious of the degree of anxiety and anger in the country? I mean, why doesn't that propel them to more serious action on this?
I'm looking at Mayor Gray. I don't know. We're living in a bubble there. I think that they, to some extent, they talk to their own constituencies, and even those constituencies have gotten concentrated. But if you look at what's happened with the public, we started off this debate with a pretty substantial majority saying, don't raise the debt limit. Then, of course, the public didn't know what the consequences of that are. They hadn't heard anything about what the likely result of that would be. That's radically shifted just over the last few weeks. So the public has now, I think, wants to see a bipartisan agreement. They're willing, in pretty substantial majorities, Paul, disagree with me if I get any of this wrong. They're willing to, in pretty substantial majorities across the political spectrum, to get a deal that really isn't even based on their priorities. Most people want to see balance between revenue and cuts. They including Republicans, only 26% of Republicans, only 20% of the public overall want to see this all done through cuts. My think tank produced a proposal along with several others, and in ours, to actually balance the budget, stabilize the debt, and make the right investments in these high priority areas. That can be done, but it's going to take some revenue. And that revenue probably ought to be concentrated on the people who are still doing really, really well, which is the people at the very top of the income ladder, where wealth has been more concentrated. We have income inequality in this country that we haven't seen since 1927, 1928. All of the fruits of the economy are still moved up to the top. We're going to just have to find revenue on one side, make some tough decisions on the other, and make the right kind of investments. Defense won't be exempt. I know that in many of the cities represented here, even that has an impact on your economies, but it won't be exempt. We're talking about fairly big numbers. I had dinner the other night with Secretary Panetta. I was trying to think about, now that he's got this new job, he caught the bumper, is the proverbial, you know, they're trying to think about how do you implement now what the president called for, which is $400 billion of additional cuts, now that's going to $800 billion. It's tough all around, so we're just going to have to, hopefully, some common sense will prevail. And I come back to this, that's no surprise to you. You do that every day, but somehow it's sort of gotten away from us in Washington.
My last thing, and then I'll turn it over to all of you. This organization's strong message has been to focus on jobs, job creation and job protection throughout these negotiations. Is there an audience for that message in Washington today amid so much talk of deficit reduction?
Well, I think that, I think that, you know, you saw a moment in December where there was a bipartisan agreement that included extending unemployment insurance, adding the payroll tax deduction to try to get a little more stimulus into the system, where there was an extension of the Bush-era tax cuts for 2 years. But I think the reason for that was because people, there was, you know, when you're cutting taxes, it's a little easier to make an agreement than when you're cutting spending or raising taxes. But there was a recognition that the economy was still, the recovery was very weak. Now it's even weaker than it was in the fourth quarter of 2010, that we needed to get some punch into the system. That worked for a while. I guess a combination of high gas prices, of what's going on in Europe, and you know, the private sector job growth has stalled out again. We had 57,000 jobs in June. But I think that we got to come back to this. This is not just hanging over the ability to actually create a pathway towards more sensible, you know, budget structure. If we don't have stronger growth in this country, if we don't put people back to work, we'll be cutting forever, and you'll never get there. Right. As David Cameron's learning in the UK.
Well, and speaking, well, let me have Mayor Coleman and then Mayor Nutter.
Yes.
And for everybody's, particularly for John's, everybody, your name and your city.
I'm Mayor Mike Coleman, city of Columbus, Ohio. There is a great deal of frustration around the country on this whole issue, but I think there's another part of the country, and a big part of the country, that looks at this in utter disbelief that there might not be a compromise. Some, I think, view this as lots of irresponsible gamesmanship, irresponsible political gamesmanship. Now, I want to know what you thought. Do you actually believe that Congress will be as irresponsible not to increase the debt ceiling by the deadline? It's an irresponsible act, or lack thereof.
Well, can I be for both? I think there's a lot of politicking, irresponsible gamesmanship, trying to affect and really extract concessions that are, it's one level political in their nature. They're intended to change the dynamic in the 2012 races. Right. And so I think that's a feature of it. I think the dominant feature of this is that a school of thought has taken over that maybe it's after a very long time, that government can't do anything right, that it has to be, we have our friend Grover Norquist saying that we got to, shrink it till you can drown it in the bathtub, that philosophy is a powerful driver. People believe it. And what's, I think, more frightening is they actually believe that the threat is overblown. We can survive this. We survived the government shutdown in the 90s. We can do this for a week or two. It won't matter. But I come back to this. Once you build, Treasury bonds are the zero risk investment vehicle of which all other credit is based.
Right.
It's no longer zero risk. And that gets put into a system where you're paying for that at the federal level, at the state level, at your level, in household increase in their borrowing expenditures for a long time to come. So the consequences of this, as bad as the shutdown of the government was in the 1990s, are much more serious, much more severe. But as I said, I think people honestly believe that. They really have convinced themselves that it won't be that bad. We'll survive for a week or two. We'll be able to extract deeper concessions from Obama, and they'll play the game out that way. Saying all that, I think they'll do it. I mean, I think that there's still a majority of kind of sane people. And I think you see it. You see it. The McConnell-Reed thing. Really,
Sure about that?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I'm going out on a limb here, but I think the McConnell-Reed deal reflects that. I think they're two people who have been around a long time. They decided, this is sort of a political construction, but that you have to do it, and you have to be able to do it in a way that gets the votes in the House and the Senate. That's why I think it's probably something along that line is more likely than the bigger deal. But maybe Obama and Boehner can strike the big deal today.
Thank you, Mr. President. Along the same lines as Mike Nutter from Philadelphia, along the same lines as Mayor Coleman, John, I'm just going to kind of say it. This all seems to be a big run-up to 2012, that some people have convinced themselves that making it bad for the president or bad for the country and creating an even worse economic climate somehow is beneficial in an upcoming election. Now, that is the absolutely most irresponsible form of governing that any of us will have seen in recent times. And I'm trying to understand, I want to go back to Jim Newton's question, which is, when the unemployment figures came out, I guess now about 10 days or so ago, yeah, in the midst of this debate, I really have not heard, read, or seen any particular response from the folks who are debating about raising the debt limit or solving the deficit. Unemployment just went up, and there was no reaction by Washington whatsoever. So I don't understand why that's not now a third component in a discussion that clearly has a short-term, you can call it a medium, or two shorts and a long, which is raise the debt limit now, focus on jobs now, and then take some time in a possibly slightly less charged environment, less heated, and actually work on deficit reduction, which we know has to happen, but doesn't have to happen today. There's only one thing that has to happen today, and that's raising the debt ceiling. Now they want to tie it together on the politics, which is now obliterated and sucked all the air out of the room of any other rational kind of conversation, because now we're pretty much just talking about deficit reduction. Everyone assumes that no one will be so irresponsible as to not do the debt ceiling. And so now they've become obsessed on getting this deal done. In the meantime, unemployment ran up and no one said a word. What is going on down there?
Well, you're asking me to explain the
unexplainable,
explain. Look, if you were smart about this, I think, and there's a conservative perspective that's different than mine, but what you do is delay deep reductions in discretionary spending for another year. You'd extend the tax cuts, the unemployment and the payroll tax deduction that was only 1 year in the last deal. You'd extend it for another year, so you continue to invest in people, put some money in their pockets so that they can keep spending, and that you would take on these long-term deficit challenges by having both revenue increase and spending come down, including entitlement spending, over the longer period of time. That, I think, if you asked 90 out of 100 economists, that they'd say that's what you ought to do. And it may be that in the context of this, some of those, again, nobody knows for sure. They have pretty tight hold on what the Boehner-Obama discussions are. But maybe there's some features of that, particularly the extension of those tax cuts. Obama put on the table, or at least Geithner put on the table, even a further payroll tax deduction. They took 2 points off the employee side. They're talking about if they extend it to take 2 points off both the employee and the employer side, which would give a little bit of boost to business and to employees. Maybe that's part of what they're talking about, but that's clearly the way one needs to manage it. And as I said, I don't know if that's what they're discussing. That was what Simpson Bowles said to do. That's what the Gang of Six more or less says what to do.
Right.
It's, I think, as I said, it's what most economists would say to do. But that's not what the House just voted for this week.
Right.
I mean, they voted for $111 billion worth of domestic discretionary cuts next year,
Right.
starting in
Including
September.
the COPS program.
Mayor Swearingen, and then Mayor Couts, and I guess Paul wanted to say something as well, but Mayor Swearingen?
Thank you, Mayor Villaraigosa. Ashley Swearingen, Mayor of Fresno, California. And John, you just answered my question a little bit, but maybe I could ask a slightly different frame and just ask you to speak to it. I know in Fresno, having gone through many, many budget cuts in the last 2.5 years, the first thing we always start with is a really clear understanding of how big is the hole. And for many of us who have suffered cuts at the local level and really struggled in maybe the first 3 rounds of cuts, now we just finished our 7th round of cuts, by round 5, 6, and 7, our employees and people who are impacted by these cuts are simply saying, dear God, where is the bottom? And we almost don't even care how much further we have to cut. We just want to get to the bottom. And so I am curious, from your perspective, just how big is this hole? And the reason why I'm asking is because it's really difficult to get a clear sense, a truthful response. I mean, frankly, I'm to the point where I don't trust anybody in terms of a source, because each side wants to say that all we have to do is this or all we have to do is that. And frankly, I think it's very frustrating to know. So the question is, how big is this hole? And my impression is that if we did everything that both sides equally hate, how far away would we be from actually making progress, being able to live within our means for ongoing operations, pay down the debt, and have some money for investment? I would argue largely capital investment, but certainly soft infrastructure as well. Like if we did, and perhaps the way to get to a deal is to not find something that people can hold their nose to and vote for, but to do something that both sides equally hate. And then the argument is, well, I hate it more, no, I hate it more, and couldn't they come together? And frankly, aren't all of these things necessary anyway, given the size of the hole?
Well, the hole's pretty substantial. It depends, and what people kind of get lost in the wilderness of mirrors on is what's the baseline for the hole. You probably don't have that problem as much because you understand your finances more directly and don't kind of assume what's going to happen here or there. To give an example what I mean by that, if the Bush tax cuts, which now expire at the end of 2012, were allowed to expire, the hole would pretty much be filled if we went back to the Clinton tax rates. Now, the Clinton economy was pretty good. We created 23 million jobs. We had twice the GDP growth that we had during the Bush years. We had more private sector investment by a factor of 4. So it was, we had a tax system that had higher rates, but people seemed to function. Wealthy did pretty well. Working people did pretty well. And that would fill the hole, or pretty much fill the hole, about 70% of the hole. But I don't think we're headed there, because I don't think either side wants to go there. So we're going to have to find a way to get about by 2014 or 2015, to get, $700-800 billion of combined revenue and spending out of the system, or revenue into the system, spending out of the system. That's, like I said, I think that's doable. It's doable with the room to have money to invest important investments. I mentioned we ended up in our plan stabilizing the debt limit in 2015, balancing the budget over the course of the next decade or so. And that still left room for doubling investments in early childhood, for maintaining and increasing support for Pell Grants, for increasing support for infrastructure and housing. But it required more revenue to do it.
Thank you, Mr.
We
President.
still have another 20 minutes here, and then we'll get into the next session, which is Paul Maslin. But so there'll be time for your questions, but there'll be more time for more questions if you keep your questions as concise as possible. Mayor Couts, and then Paul, and then Mayor Fox. And
I'll try to
Thank
keep
you,
my
Mr.
answers
President.
more concise, too.
No, that's, we came to hear you.
The conversation has been very good in understanding what's going on in Washington. All of us on a local level are executives and run a service business. And so we know what our revenues are and we know what our expenditures are. My hope is that our people in Congress, along with the President and everyone in the administration, would look to the good of this country. And we no longer operate just within this nation. We are on a global stage. And with each day, please look at Minnesota when our government shut down. And now we're trying to really understand the level of revenue short because of that shutdown and all of the people who have been laid off. So it's close to $100 million in 19 days of revenue lost. Now, when you look at all of the unemployment that's going on and borders just shut down, and every day we read about this. So when we're looking at revenue and we're looking at expenditures, do they not see that each time they continue to do what they're doing in Washington really is a loss in revenue? And my question to you is this. The domestic part is so small in regards to the federal budget. And what would be your advice to us as mayors? Because CDBG is a program that helps us to employ people to help those who are underprivileged. Cops, we put police officers on the street. All of us had benefited from cops. That's going away. Burn Jag, safer. So how do we impact that portion of the budget? Because it means jobs, it means revenue that comes into the federal treasury, and also revenue into our state treasury because of those jobs. Help us.
Well, I'd say two things. I couldn't agree with you more about the kind of the fact that we live now in a global economy, and if we make bad choices and don't think of the country first, we're just going to begin to slip behind, and once you start slipping behind, it ends up being very hard to catch up. The most important thing I think we could do to solve the deficit problem is if we had that unemployment rate headed in the right direction, putting people back to work, creating more profit for business and more wage growth for workers. You create that virtuous cycle that I mentioned that we saw in the 90s, and that created a surplus, but also people did very well in the middle of the economy as well. And the one thing I haven't talked about, and the one that but is implicated by your last question, is one piece of the balance is not extracting all the money out of the discretionary side of the budget, which is becoming smaller and smaller share of the overall federal budget. In Obama's April proposal, which we're going to go beyond, we were taking the discretionary share of the federal budget on the domestic side down to a level that was as low as it was in the Eisenhower administration. And now we're talking about deeper cuts than that. I think the only way to balance that is to also look for savings on the mandatory side. In healthcare, that means really moving forward with trying to create a healthcare delivery system that is going to be a lot less expensive on a per capita basis than the one we have now. It's not an answer to block grant Medicaid and cut $770 billion out of federal support. All that's going to mean is throwing more people out on the street without health care. We have got to get, and in my view, it's not an answer to have vouchers for Medicare where costs keep going up and the recipients just bear all the burden of those increased costs. We have got to wring cost out of the healthcare system. You know these numbers, but we're spending 17% of our gross national domestic product on healthcare. The next highest level country is Switzerland at 11. Most of the developed countries, highly developed countries, are spending 9 or 10. And we have, we're not going to get to 9 or 10, but we've got to contain that, or else that health budget will either eat up the entire federal budget and the discretionary side on the one hand, or else we're going to put all the burden on the recipients who can't afford it. We're going to have a lot more uninsured people in this country.
We have 20 minutes, so we'll try to get Paul.
Thanks, Mayor. I just had a quick comment to Mayors Coleman and Nutter, who was asking essentially, do they get it, and what's going on with jobs? John and I can be accused both of being overly partisan here, but I would simply note that the quote in the last month, essentially, which was, and I'll paraphrase it, in 2012, the American voters aren't going to care that much about unemployment. Who did that quote come from? David Plouffe, the president's political director. So I'm not, obviously some of that is a protection against bad news, but some of it is an acknowledgement. The priorities are different, obviously, about how to get to a budget deal or a debt ceiling deal, but an acknowledgement that that is the priority coming from both the administration and Congress. Unemployment and specific attempts to try to reduce jobs are right now, maybe if not the caboose, they're certainly not the locomotive.
Mayor Fox, and remember, everyone, keep your questions as concise as possible so we can get to as many of you as possible. Mayor Fox?
Yes, sir. I think I can do that.
And what city?
I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina, and we are the second largest financial services center in the country. And I want to speak to the fact that over the last 10 years, there have been tax cuts designed to create jobs, and yet we have enormous amounts of private capital sitting on the sidelines. And at least part of this deficit reduction conversation is triggered towards reducing uncertainty in the private sector. My question is perhaps a prognostication from you, is if we achieve a grand bargain, do you really expect the private sector to respond by pushing money into the marketplace and creating jobs?
I think that the White House is operating on the assumption that that is going to be the direct effect of the grand deal. And that's, I think, why the president didn't grab the McConnell initiative and run with it, which I think had some momentum when McConnell, he's the Senate minority leader, Senate Republican leader, when he put that on the table. I think that if the president had picked that up, I think that would put enormous pressure on the House to kind of go along with that, with some version of that deal. He didn't do that. He kept at the big deal, and I think he did that because he believes, or at least he and his team believe, that the psychology of a big deal will restore business confidence. People will take that money off their balance sheets, begin to invest again in the domestic economy. I have to say, I'm very skeptical of that. I think the reason people aren't investing their money is because they don't have customers coming through the door. There's no demand out there that's, the places that are, it's Apple Computer's investing money because they're selling iPads, and they're creating jobs in the process. I think that the notion that the psychology of the fact that the government could actually function will change the dynamic of private sector investment, I'm more skeptical about, but I do think that's what's in the back of their heads, and the reason that they're pressing for this much bigger deal that's much longer term, and that's harder to get because it means that they have to make a deal essentially on the House Republican side of the playing field. But I think that's what they're thinking.
Mayor Ortiz?
Thank you, Mr. President. Frank Ortiz, Pembroke Pines, Florida. Quick question. Do you believe a factor will be in any place with the alleged misappropriation of Afghanistan money for reconstruction, the alleged $10 million pass-through somebody's pocket, whatever they're talking about? Do you believe anybody, Senator McCaskill made a comment that we have to watch the horse more. Do you think that'll be a factor in any of this?
No, I don't think it's a big driver in this debate. I think that the public's appetite for sticking with a big commitment to Afghanistan is very low, and that the Kabul bank, the corruption, in addition to the loss of the servicemen and women and the casualties that are going on the ground in Afghanistan is very important part of that. I think that where the president has signaled, obviously, that we're going to draw down to 70,000 by the end of 2012, and I think they're headed towards trying to. I think it's different than Iraq. I think that the plan will be to try to hold a smaller force, 10, 20,000 troops in Afghanistan beyond 2014 as a counter to the terrorism threat that's as much in Pakistan as it is in Afghanistan, more in Pakistan than Afghanistan. And how you budget for that is difficult. Whether the Congress will continue to provide resources for political reform there, for money on development assistance in Pakistan, given what's happening there. I think there's going to be you're going to see the dollar flows to that part of the world coming down, but in the big scheme of things, the development side of that and the economic side of that are small compared to the military footprint. And if we have the it costs $1 million a year to have someone deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan. So that's the order of magnitude when you got more than 100,000 troops deployed in Afghanistan. That's, I think, coming down. It's sort of baked into the thinking in both parties. I don't see any pressure from either side, but I don't think it affects this issue very much.
Mayor Soglin, and then Mayor Miyagishima, and then I'm going to go to Jim Newton because we're getting close to Mayor Soglin.
Thank you. Paul Soglin, Madison, Wisconsin. When will they stop drinking the Kool-Aid? When will the adults take over in Congress? Implicit in Jim's question and twice implicit in your answers is the recognition that public investment in infrastructure and human capacity is basically what spurs the private investment and what creates a healthy economy. We saw it in the Clinton years. We saw it in the recovery from the Great Depression. We saw it after the Civil War. What's it going to take to get the 70% of Congress that is not ideologically driven to stand up and say this is the solution?
Well, I don't want to. I mean, I know, like, I think they started with me because I'd be the downer for the day, and then everybody had one. Well, okay, what are the opportunities here?
This is the most important issue of our time.
But I think you kind of saw that begin to take form with the Gang of Six. Like I said, the Gang of Six come under attack from both the left and the right. From the left because of what it's done on Social Security and others, and from the right on because it's raising more taxes. But I think you begin to see a sort of a common sense middle operating that says, look, we're going to have to make some tough choices about entitlements in order to have some money to invest in the important priorities for the country. And my top ones would be science and tech, infrastructure. I'd put the transformation to a new energy system in that, and science and technology. That's what's always spurred business creation, private investment, job creation, and wage growth, which we've had precious little of for the last decade. We got to get people's wages going up as well, and that's going to only happen if you can get the unemployment rate down.
Didn't you say that of the three possibilities, the Gang of Six was the least likely?
I think it's the least likely in the next week. I think it's the least likely in the West week. But I think you see the fact that having been moribund, they came out and there was a fair amount of bipartisan support in the Senate for it. I think meant that probably that's the direction that the conversation needs to go. And I think, quite frankly, I think if the House Republicans were willing to go there, you'd see a substantial number of House Democrats willing to go that way too. I think right now they're locked in their corners, and neither one wants to give very much. It's a more partisan institution historically, and certainly in recent years, and it's kind of zero-sum game now. I think people think if the other guy wins, we lose. So, at some point, look, maybe we'll find out on August 2nd, and people will come to their senses.
Mayor Miyagishima, as I said, and then we'll go to Jim Newton.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Mr. Podesta, Ken Miyagishima, Mayor of Las Cruces, New Mexico, America's #1 city. But as much as I'd like to ask you a question, I'm going to defer to Mayor Kwan of Oakland, because she really did raise her hand about 1 second quicker than I. So
Okay, Mayor Kwan.
Now, this is because I tell them I had a beautiful Ansel Adams of Las Cruces. About 2 weeks ago, Mayor Villaraigosa brought some of us together with the White House and asked us to give a local face on what would cost us in terms of bond cost. And I think my piece is running in the Tribune today. I'm wondering whether or not you thought that was effective. But I have to tell you, when I was doing it, I was also feeling angst, because when President Obama had to make the compromise over the last close down, we lost the whole summer youth job program, which is probably going to cost us lives this summer, certainly has cost us a lot of grief for our young people. So I think we're really concerned about whether or not there's a human face in terms of the cost of the deal one way or the other.
Well, that's, I think that's the most actually depressing part of the entire Washington conversation. And if you listen to cable news or Sunday shows or the back and forth, it's all about the politics. It's never about the impact on real lives. And, particularly now with the unemployment rate for people under 25 still hovering around 25%, that's not just this year and next year and the year after that. That's a lifetime of lost, of wage suppression and no conversation about it.
No conversation.
So I don't want to sugarcoat it. I'm as depressed as you are about that.
And the first part of her question was, do you think it's important that mayors
Yes.
weigh in and put a face on this crisis?
Yes.
what to
First
do
of
about
all, I think I mentioned the fact that the public's, in the reporting of this, the public attitude shift has been, most of the pollsters and most of the reporting indicate, Paul, correct me, has been more dramatic than virtually any topic on any issue, just in the last, 6 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, a classic case of they didn't have a clue what this was all about, and then all of a sudden it came front and center, and now some real attitudes are developing.
So I think to the extent that that could be drawn down the way you can, to not just the real borrowing costs of the cities, but what it means to the people on the streets of your cities, I think that's really critical.
So we should talk about the jobs we're going to lose, the projects we're going to lose, how much more it's going to cost us. Because in California, just because the state has bad ratings, we're all now paying more for our loans, even if we have good credit.
We're at a closing point. I do want to give Jim Newton an opportunity for a last question and then maybe a comment as well.
Well, really, you all have anticipated really what was my last question, which is to ask you if you could give any guidance here to people, these mayors, of what they can do about this, whether this is just a matter of learning to live with less, or whether there is some chance to really materially affect the course of this debate.
Well, I've kind of hit this in a few different dimensions, but let me come back and summarize a couple of points. One is, I think, the creative use of federal dollars, and using federal dollars to leverage private dollars, or trying to capitalize local government streams through more effective structures, I think, is really necessary. And ways in which the federal government can create more efficiency and proficiency, and you have ideas about that because you're kind of living it every day, I think would actually be helpful. It kind of opens up some space. The other thing I would say is that conversation about entitlements is really also a conversation about the other side of the budget. You can't get away from that. That one just crowds out the other. So in trying to make an argument about what needs to happen, particularly in healthcare reform, but support for some general downward pressure, and I'm not just talking about Medicaid and Medicare, but across the board in the entitlement spending, I think you ought to be thinking about that and saying that these are higher priority investments that are going to produce a stronger economy going forward, and that are going to produce more strong private sector growth, and that you're able to demonstrate that because as this mayor likes to say, this is where the economy's growing. This is where your communities are the heart of where business formation, job creation is happening, and it's where the future of this country lies. So I think you just got to make an argument that you can't wipe out the discretionary side of the budget and leave it all to interest and entitlements.
We're at the end of this program, but let me just say there was a reason why the first person on my list to hear from was John Podesta, because as you could see, he talks commonsensically. Someone who's focused on problem solving, and the Center for American Progress has really been for us in the city a real not just a think tank, but a incubator of great ideas. And I want to thank you. And interestingly enough, when you talked about the where we should be in terms of framing this issue, where we should be in terms of trying to solve this deficit and debt in a way that focuses on jobs and growth, it's interesting. Around the table, I could see the heads shake up in the yes fashion and agreement. What you see here are mayors, Republican and Democrat, who have figured this out, that you don't just cut your way out of a crisis like that. You got to spend, you got to be smart and strategic. And John Podesta, give him a big hand, everybody. Thank you very much. I'm going to give you